Canada's interprovincial trade barriers are holding back our economy. I'm Marco Perri. Welcome to the Perri platform. Here's a hot topic: trade. But we're not going to be talking about it in the context of the global environment. How's it doing right here in Canada? The Frontier Center for Public Policy put out an eye-opening article about how inefficiently our provinces handle trade amongst themselves. At a basic level, provinces vary by output and input, and that's really due to capacity and capabilities. One area might excel at something like oil extraction, another might be good with wood, another with metal, another with technology, and on the flip side, you may lack in a certain area. You will need to trade with a province that has a surplus in what you lack so you can meet your needs. Theoretically, this allows everyone to focus on what they're good at and attain what they lack via trading their excess. You're not good at doing this one thing? Focus on what you're good on and we'll cover you. This produces the most optimal arrangement because it maximizes two things: efficiency and production. One province might be able, for example, to extract 1 liter of oil, but it will take them 7 days and be highly damaging, while another province can extract 10 liters in 2 hours. It doesn't make sense for the weaker producer to even spend time on that frontier, given opportunity costs. Focus on what you're good at, and we as a country can cover where you lack. This is a basic pillar of free trade economic theory. It boosts productivity and growth, and it's been proven to do so. Surprisingly, barriers to this free trade exist, and they prohibit Canada as a whole from fully capitalizing. There is a fundamental lack of teamwork between the provinces, and we can all feel it as Canadians. The International Monetary Fund suggests that Canada loses out on a 4% increase in GDP per capita due to these internal trade impediments. So what's that mean? Our GDP per capita is around $45K US dollars, and per capita really means per person. 3% of that is $1,350 US. So each person is losing out on value equivalent to $1,350 US from simple inefficiencies, things that would be rather easy to get rid of if we tried a little bit. And for you to picture how big of an issue it is, multiply that GDP per capita by our population, and you can see just how much money and value we're missing out on due to this lack of free trade. So that's the problem, but what exactly are the issues here? We've identified that the inter-province trade is stifled, but why and how? It really stems from a notion of protectionism, and it's so odd for me to say that in relation to provinces within a single country. The idea of protecting local industry against, you could say, even foreign competitors, the way they're viewing it. Certain provinces may be looking to maximize their own gains while not thinking of Canada as a whole. It's sort of like a prisoner's dilemma from game theory. Let's say there are two criminals from the same gang who are in jail. They are both given the same plea bargain options, and think about this in the context of what's going on. So the first option is, both of you rat on each other, and you each serve 2 years. The second option is, both of you refuse to cooperate, and we don't get enough evidence to fully convict you, and you will each serve 1 year. The third option is, if you betray the other person, but the other person does not betray you, in other words, they remain silent, you go free, but the other person serves 3 years. Logically, think about it. Logically, the best outcome is for nobody to speak because it produces the least amount of jail time. In this case, it will be 1 year each, which equals 2 years in total for this gang. Despite this mutually beneficial arrangement, you start thinking that maybe you might get taken advantage of, or you might just not want to serve any years at all and push that onto the other person. You start to be selfish and think about yourself. If you both succumb to that, you end up with the worst possible solution. You rat each other out, you produce 4 years of jail time combined, and that is 2 more years than the first option. Now, we get to the interesting one. Even if you rat someone out, and they had faith in you, and they didn't do the same, you walk free, and the benefit falls upon you, but the total jail time is still 3 years, but just for that one other person. If you think back to the gang, that's a bigger hit to them than you each taking 1 year. The 2 years combined versus the 3 now. This sort of strategic decision-making process is going on right now with the provinces. In this case, it appears it really is in our best interest to cooperate. After all, we're all Canadian, we're under the same flag, but there is a lack of that cooperation, or an increase in self-serving interest that holds it back. One example of some of these mindless barriers that are in place and making it very difficult to initiate these free trades between the provinces is the regulations for trucking. One province may allow a certain tire size, or a maximum weight, or certain times when you can drive and when you can't, or anything along those lines, and another province can have an entirely different set of rules. Cross into another province and you can make your current truck, your rig, and your cargo illegal. If you haven't ensured that it fits both criteria and you can't change your things, well, you're kind of screwed then. This is excessive and it makes transporting goods difficult. This is especially true for smaller manufacturers who might not be able to have the resources to meet these differing criteria. Some portion of imports and exports are held up via that. It really makes no sense. Canada should just have a standardized approach to it. A federally mandated list of rules would make things smoother, but we don't have it. There are also arbitrary limits on things like products and quantity being brought across borders. So weird to say this too. Provinces within Canada, and we're talking about trade limits and how much you can bring through to another province. One example is, in 2017, someone traveling from Quebec back to his hometown in New Brunswick. There is a limit on how much beer you can take back from one province to another, and he exceeded that. He had too much beer. So, he was fined by the police and he had to go through the courts to get it dealt with. We're going to talk more about that in a second, but here are some other barriers. Unpasteurized cheese cannot be shipped out of the province of Quebec. Provinces often require you to submit paperwork for each one instead of just once for Canada. Only BC, Manitoba, and Nova Scotia allow consumer wine shipments directly from the company. Other provinces have to go through those provincial alcohol dealers. Organic food standards are different across Canada. Some may or may not fit the label depending on where you are. Places have different maple syrup grades even. You can meet standards in one area, but you can't sell in another. Individually, these sound really silly. Little tiny changes that may inconvenience a company, but together, they create ripples that can hold back entire industries, and at the end of the day, Canada as a whole has to sacrifice 4% of their GDP per capita due to these inefficiencies. The bottom line is, it's troublesome to manage the different rules and expectations of the varying provinces. It makes trade and even movement of these goods difficult. You can't bring back a certain amount of goods to one place from another. You need these tires to drive here. You need to meet our label criteria. It's almost as if we're talking about trade between different countries right now. Companies can find it easier to deal with foreign markets than domestic ones. That's literally insane. Select areas are caught up either defending their maple syrup industry or milk or alcohol, and it produces a deterrent to national efficiency. Ironically, Canada has some trade agreements with dozens of countries around the world, but we can't even iron out what's going on internally. It's holding us back. Some argue this goes against our very constitution. It's actually written that, and here's what it says basically, all articles of growth, produce, and manufacture of any one of the provinces shall be admitted freely into each of the other. But that is clearly not what's happening. The Supreme Court had a very interesting ruling about this, and it's in relation to the beer case I talked about when the guy was traveling from Quebec back to New Brunswick. They ruled against that, stating that there isn't really a constitutional guarantee of free trade between provinces. The courts argued that although it is written that goods will be admitted freely, the term is ambiguous and should be interpreted in context with regional diversity and local concerns being reflected within a single nation. They also say, as long as the provinces do not impose barriers on the flow of goods, but instead impose barriers for different reasons, well, it's all good then. They state something like the flow of liquor is being held back for public health reasons. I think it's a silly rationale, top down. Everything there is wrong. First of all, it's pretty clear what the Constitution says. I'm not too sure you can even call it ambiguous like what they try to do. It says freely admitted. That doesn't mean you can stop someone from buying or bringing in cans of alcohol from province to province. That's not free. It is limited. The same can be said for differing standards. It's not free to be moved around. They even go as far as making it hard to do the actual moving of the goods with these differing truck criteria. You can't even drive between the provinces freely because you have to change out your tires and whatnot to ensure you meet the law in certain places. Regional diversity and local concerns is fine, but we are a country. We aren't talking about global trade here with a rival nation. The idea is you do what you do, we do what we do, and we can all reap the benefits from that. I would agree with their points on a global scale, but we're under the same flag. It's so odd to me. Do we want to better mobilize the entire unit, or allow the individual parts to meddle in mediocrity? It doesn't mean that we kill entire industries in one location, but some of these barriers are downright silly and they're overprotective. All the criteria should be standardized across Canada. We don't need certain rules here, certain rules there. You are organic here, not organic there. It really makes no sense. From trucking rules to organic labels to maple syrup, it's all silly. Let's standardize that at the federal level. Also, nobody buys that provinces are looking to stop the free flow of alcohol for health reasons. I can't believe they said that. People can buy alcohol anywhere. At home, when they're traveling, when they're in another province, it doesn't matter. These guys just want to control what brands people consume and where. Fundamentally, this lack of cooperation hinders Canada as a whole. We all feel it, and even if you don't feel it, you can look at the stats. We are not reaching our potential. We're looking to finalize a trade deal with Mexico and America, while the provinces within Canada are still trying to put up roadblocks between each other. This may be due to the premiers all having different agendas and whatnot, and in Canada, the powers are very spread out, you could say. The federal government does not have legislation in a lot of areas. You could argue they'd be stepping over their bounds to get this done, but I would make the case it's in the Constitution, and it is actively hindering Canada. We need to make a change right here. This is an issue that should receive more spotlight, and I really do believe the federal government has a hand to play. The courts messed up the ruling, but we need to bring that back. Free trade between provinces is a basic necessity, and I'm still shocked to this day. In 2019, that's not a thing. We are more active trading partners with rival nations across the world, but not across borders within our own country. It's simply asinine. It costs us too much to not attempt to fix that right now. 4% of the GDP. Keep that in mind. It's also laughable how silly some of these roadblocks are. You really want to tell me that maple syrup has to be different qualities in different parts of the province, and one thing can be organic in Ontario, but when you cross the border, it's no longer so? Get your stuff together, man. So that brings me to the end of our conversation for today. If you enjoy the content, be sure to leave a review and share. You can find me on Twitter at Perri Platform. I'll see you soon.